Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Gerardo couple. Jennifer Gerardo was born December 19, 1970, in the city of Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana, USA. She spent her childhood and teenage years in the area. Jennifer graduated from Bishop Luers High School, where she achieved excellent results in advanced courses. She then attended Purdue University at Indianapolis, studying communication and actively participating in the theater arts program. Later, she continued her communication studies at Butler University. Jennifer earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication and Theater Arts. Throughout her career, she worked in marketing for various Indiana companies, including roles in Carmel and Indianapolis. Notably, she served as marketing manager at Cercier Instrumentation for several years. In the summer of 1986, Jennifer met Mark Gerardo in Fort Wayne, Indiana. At the time, they were both teenagers, and Jennifer was working at a local Taco Bell. Mark was immediately drawn to her, captivated by her striking blue eyes and bright smile. Mark was initially unable to express his feelings to Jennifer. The romance between Mark and Jennifer only really began when they met again by chance after 4 years, at a nearby shopping mall where Jennifer was working. He began visiting her frequently, and one day, she encouraged him to make a move, asking him directly when he would take her out. Jennifer's confidence and willingness to speak her mind drew Mark to her. He described her demeanor as the opposite of his own, admiring her boldness. Melissa Murphy, a childhood friend of Jennifer's, recalled how excited Jennifer was when she first met Mark, saying Jennifer was convinced he was the one and would do anything for him. Mark and Jennifer got married on October 23, 1993, when Mark was 25 and Jennifer was 23. Their relationship, which began in adolescence, continued to flourish into adulthood. Mark reflected on their happiness together, saying he couldn't imagine spending his life with anyone else. However, like any couple, Mark and Jennifer faced challenges in their marriage and had to navigate the low points together. Mark said the arguments between him and his wife were very tense, and Jennifer always won because she wanted to be the one to make the final decision. Mark's high school friend, Mike Hartman, shared that although he wasn't privy to all the details of their relationship, he knew they had fierce disagreements. Despite their strong marriage, the 2008 financial crisis significantly impacted them. Mark later mentioned that it changed everything, and money became a major source of stress and arguments. In November 2011, they relocated to Greenville, South Carolina, where they found new marketing jobs. Exploring the state's beautiful landscapes brought them closer together, and their marriage experienced a renewal. However, their renewed life came to a halt in 2017. Jennifer lost her job, leaving her struggling to find a new one, and she was no longer the strong, confident woman she once was. Around this time, the couple felt it was time for a change and a fresh start. They decided to move to Delaware, and Mark began looking for a job right away. He came across a job posting at the University of Delaware for a creative director in the marketing department, a role that would come with supervisory responsibilities. Mark emailed his application and quickly received a response from a woman 15 years his junior, who would be his supervisor if he got the job. She invited him for an interview. Initially, Mark was nervous about working under someone 15 years younger than him, but his worries soon disappeared after meeting Meredith Chapman. This was their first encounter. At the time, Meredith was 33 years old and originally from Pennsylvania. She had graduated from the University of Delaware with a bachelor's in communication and a master's in education. She was married to Luke, a former New York City councilman, and they lived in Fairfield Crest, Delaware, with their dog Indy. The couple had married in 2009. During his interview, Mark was immediately drawn to Meredith's beauty and intelligence. He recalled thinking, "I have to work for this person," within 5 minutes of sitting across from her. He found her articulate, energetic, and passionate about her job, and was impressed by her accomplishments at such a young age. Meredith seemed impressed by Mark, as she immediately offered him the job. Mark gratefully accepted the offer and moved to Wilmington, Delaware in November 2017. His wife, Jen Eyre, stayed behind in South Carolina to lease out their home. Mark was excited about the new opportunity and the chance to advance his career. Unbeknownst to him, this marked the start of the demise of his marriage to Jen Eyre. Mark spent 45 days living alone in Delaware, getting to know Meredith better. They discovered they had a lot in common, and she invited him out for a drink one evening. Mark found it easy to talk to Meredith and opened up to her about his marriage to Jen Eyre, sharing some of his personal struggles. He also told her about the loss of his parents and brother. Mark was unaware of what was happening between him and Meredith at first. Mark stated that he really hadn't known what was happening. He admits that he feels affection for Meredith and expresses that being with her is a wonderful experience. After their dinner date, he started to understand his feelings and realized he was attracted to her. As Mark spent more time with Meredith, the issues in his marriage became more apparent. He began to compare Meredith to his wife, noting that Meredith praised him and made him feel appreciated, which was something his wife never did. Mark was really touched by Meredith's compliments. Mark was deeply attracted to Meredith, but he felt guilty about betraying his wife. As a result, he initially attempted to end his relationship with Meredith. However, he couldn't shake off the feelings he had developed for her, especially after learning that Meredith was unhappy in her own 9-year marriage. Mark explains that his relationship with Meredith is great, which made it difficult for him to shut down the relationship. He wanted to understand what drew them together. Before Jen Eyre joined her husband in Delaware, Mark and Meredith had already confessed their love for each other. Mark felt it was natural to express his love for Meredith, as the feeling was powerful. In December 2017, Jen Eyre moved north and noticed Mark's distant behavior. She soon confronted him, sensing that he might be involved with another woman. Jen Eyre asked Mark what was going on with him and said that he was acting different. Jen Eyre specifically mentioned Meredith because Mark often mentioned her when discussing new job. Although Mark initially denied the affair, Jen Eyre continued to question him, aware that something was amiss between him and Meredith. She began to closely monitor his activities. Mark is confused as to why Jen Eyre knows the private aspects of his affair with Meredith. Around Valentine's Day in 2008, Jen Eyre collected evidence that her husband was having an affair. However, this came at a cost. Mark discovered that Jen Eyre had hired a company to hack into his phone, allowing her to read his texts, view his photos, and access his call records with Meredith. Mark confessed to Jen Eyre that he had developed feelings for Meredith, unable to continue the deception. Jen Eyre, heartbroken, but determined to save their marriage, asked Mark to attend marriage counseling with her, and he agreed. However, during their second session, Mark discovered a recording device hidden in his jacket. Initially thinking it was an anti-theft device, he realized it was actively recording him. Furious, Mark confronted Jen Eyre. She claimed she wanted to understand the extent of his relationship with Meredith and suspected they were planning something together. This has been marked the beginning of the end for Mark and Jen Eyre's marriage. Mark eventually told Jen Eyre that he intended to file for divorce in May 2018, once he had met the residency requirements in Delaware and could leave their shared home. During this period, Meredith Chapman's life was on an upward trajectory. She had landed a new role as assistant vice president at Villanova University in Pennsylvania and relocated to Radnor Township. Meanwhile, her marriage was coming to an end, paving the way for her to pursue a relationship with Mark. As Meredith and Mark's relationship deepened, Jen Eyre, was Mark's wife at that time, began consulting with divorce coach Sheila Brennan. Jen Eyre was struggling with feelings of bitterness and anger, stemming from being replaced by a younger woman. Her concerns were compounded by financial uncertainty, having moved north without securing a new job. Jenaire's situation continued to deteriorate, ultimately taking a toll on her mental health. Mark noticed her distress and suggested that she see a psychiatrist for professional help. He also encouraged her to reach out to family and friends, as she had mentioned suicidal thoughts and even threatened to jump out of a window. Mark stated that Jenaire appeared to have come to terms with their upcoming divorce. She walked up to him with a list of things she wanted him to do in the weeks before he officially moved out. Her requests included activities such as going on hikes, having dinner together, and generally spending quality time as a couple. Mark agreed to fulfill her requests, thinking it would help Jenaire be in a better emotional state. During this time, Jenaire appeared to be acting normally, although she would occasionally become emotional and break down in tears. Over the next few weeks, Jenaire started posting on the app Nextdoor. She was looking for recommendations for a good marriage counselor who could help couples that were close to getting a divorce. In her post, Jenaire specified that they needed a counselor with extensive education and experience in handling complex issues such as infidelity, depression, traumatic experiences, and child-parent dynamics. However, unbeknownst to Mark, Jenaire had secretly been planning her revenge. On the night of April 23, 2018, Mark and his wife Jenaire were scheduled to meet at a restaurant to discuss their divorce agreement. However, Jenaire sent Mark a series of messages, first saying she was running late, then telling him to go home as she wouldn't make it to the. Mark got up to leave, but minutes later, he received a disturbing picture from Jenaire, an image of trash with a condom in the middle. This led him to believe Jenaire was rummaging through Meredith's trash can outside her home. More text messages followed, including one that said he had ruined co-life. Jenaire's next messages were even more ominous, saying she hoped he never found happiness and she had said goodbye to Mark. Alarmed and fearing for Meredith's safety, Mark tried to contact Meredith multiple times, but all his calls and texts went unanswered. Worried about a confrontation between Jenaire and Meredith, Mark rushed to Meredith's house. What he found was far more horrific than he had anticipated. Upon arrival, he discovered Meredith lying face down on her kitchen floor. Around her head was a pool of blood. Nearby, he also found Jenaire's lifeless body on the floor. Mark shouted in shock and ran to Meredith. He said, "Baby, oh baby, what have you done?" Meredith had excitedly posted on her Instagram about her new job at Villanova less than 2 hours before she died, expressing her excitement. According to Meredith's 5:42 p.m. post, after just 1 week on the job, she's already earned the love of fans at NOA Nation. Later that evening, she arrived at her home on Lowry Lane in Radnor Township, parked her Audi in the driveway, opened the door, and walked inside, unaware that Jenaire had broken in and was hiding, waiting to attack her. When Mark got there, Tim, one of Meredith's neighbors, was present. He mentioned that he heard a commotion and went out to see what happened. Mark asked him to call 911. Sergeant Christopher Four of the Radnor Township Police Department said the call made his heart sink. Sergeant Christopher said they don't usually get calls like this. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic with a lot of police present. Mark, who appeared out of breath according to Christopher, was put in an ambulance before being taken to the police station as a suspect. After questioning Mark and discovering that the gun used in the 2 deaths was under Jenaire's body, the police concluded that Jenaire had broken into Meredith's home, killed her, and then committed suicide. The police received a tip from witness, who claimed to see a woman in a trench coat, hat, sunglasses, and possibly a wig watching the house with binoculars. They also found a set of car keys at the crime scene that were traced to a Cadillac rented by Jenaire. Mark was surprised to learn about the Cadillac. He said he learned most of this from the police and the news. Jenaire had rented the car 2 weeks before the incident, and it was parked just outside their apartment. Mark continued his investigation by examining his wife's bank statements, phone records, and computer backups, discovering that she was leading a double life. After Mark confessed to his affair shortly after Valentine's Day, he found out that Jen Eyre had opened a secret bank account and credit cards. She used these cards to buy audio surveillance equipment, a lock-picking kit, computer hacking software, and DNA testing kits for his clothes. Mark also revealed that she purchased advanced GPS tracking devices and attached them to both his and Meredith's cars. Mark stated that he had found over 400 images of private conversations between Meredith and him from text and Snapchat, and that Jen Eyre would access his phone in the middle of the night. On March 20, 2018, 5 weeks before committing the murder, Jen Eyre bought the gun she used in the murder and suicide. Her credit card statements showed that she practiced shooting the gun 3 times at a firing range. Mark claimed that Jen Eyre had secretly placed several recording devices in his clothes. He discovered files containing hundreds of hours of audio recordings his wife had not only recorded but also transcribed into notebooks. According to Mark, Jen Eyre had taken all his jackets and embedded multiple devices, constantly switching them in and out. Every day, she would remove a device, download the recorded content, and then sew it back into his jacket, repeating this process for weeks. It was revealed that on the night Jen Eyre killed Meredith and herself, she emailed a letter to her family, chillingly explaining her motive. She had begun the letter weeks prior, dating her entries, and described how it was an act of revenge for what he had done to her, saying, "That's as simple as it gets." Dr. Robbie Ludwig, a psychotherapist who studied marriage-related homicides and Red Letter, suggested that Jen Eyre may have been driven to kill Meredith and herself because she could not bear losing Mark. Dr. Robin commented that, in his opinion, there was something about listening to the recordings that made Jen Eyre angry and upset. Dr. Robin went on to say that Jen Eyre found the strength to act because she believed that her suspicions about her husband's character were correct. However, when she became suicidal and lost hope in life, she became more dangerous. It seemed that she had arranged everything to make her husband suffer. In a TV interview with Dr. Ozark, Mark shared a shocking revelation. Jen Eyre had written a 15-page letter, confessing that if he had walked in on the crime scene, she would have killed him as well. He acknowledged that he had hurt Jen Eyre, and his greatest regret was making her feel trapped and without options. He deeply wished he could travel back in time and erase the hurt he had caused. He confessed that his love for Jen Eyre had remained strong and never disappeared. Mark explained that he drove by Meredith's house multiple times as a way to cope with his emotions and come to terms with what had happened, helping him to process his feelings and move on. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabriela Alcano. Gabriela Alcano was born on May 17, 2001, in Santiago, the capital city of Chile. She was the only child of Federico Alino and Carolina Donosa Campos, and the first grandchild in a large, close-knit family. Her paternal uncle, Rodrigo, who served as her godfather, and her grandfather, Carlos, both adored her deeply, with Carlos regarding her as the central figure in his life. Gabriela grew up in a loving and supportive environment, despite her family's modest means. Her parents, though not wealthy, worked hard to provide her with a good education and upbringing. When Gabriela was 5, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, who dedicated herself to raising her. Her father, however, remarried and had 2 younger sons, but he continued to support Gabriela and her mother financially and remained involved in her life. Gabriela was a sweet and friendly child, who was a bit shy but made friends easily. Her gentle nature and lovely appearance earned her admiration from those around her. She excelled academically, enjoyed music, dance, and art, and her parents encouraged her talents. Gabriela cherished her relationships with her younger half-brothers, spending quality time with them at her father's nearby home during weekends and holidays. Overall, Gabriella's childhood was a happy and carefree time, filled with love and support from her family. Gabriella's first love was at the age of 15. She fell for Fabian Chasis Aravan, a fellow student who was a year older. At first, their relationship was innocent and sweet. They would walk together, share ice cream, and steal kisses. Fabian came from a good family with well-respected parents who valued education and raised him to be a good person. However, Fabian was a quiet and private person who struggled with social interactions. He would avoid eye contact and turn away from others, leading many to think he was just shy. Gabriella's father met Fabian and thought he was a calm, dependable, and responsible young man. He had a serious talk with Fabian, asking him to take care of Gabriella, and Fabian promised to do so. Initially, Fabian made an effort to be attentive and caring. However, as time passed, a different side of Fabian emerged. He became controlling and cruel, revealing a darker aspect of his personality. Fabian's controlling behavior dominated the relationship. He was intensely jealous and dictated who Gabriella could and couldn't interact with. He monitored her phone activity, insisting on instant responses to his calls and messages, regardless of the time. If she failed to comply, he would throw tantrums, displaying childish and abusive behavior. During the first 6 months of their relationship, Gabriella attempted to downplay Fabian's frequent outbursts of anger and jealousy, believing they would eventually subside. Blinded by her love for him, she tried to meet all his demands and held on to the hope that he would revert to the caring and gentle person she initially fell in love with. Fabian's behavior became increasingly irritable, volatile, and aggressive. He emotionally drained Gabriella, progressing from verbal abuse to physical mistreatment. He would slap her, pull her hair, or grab her hands, often leaving no visible marks. However, bruises would occasionally appear on her wrists and shoulders, evidence of Fabian's rough handling. Gabriella tried to hide her situation, but her loved ones noticed her depressed state and frequent tears. She was no longer her usual cheerful and outgoing self, instead withdrawing from friends and avoiding contact with people Fabian had forbidden her from seeing. Gabriella repeatedly tried to end her relationship with Fabian, but he would not let her go. Despite her efforts to break free, he would pressure her into getting back together. This cycle of breaking up and reuniting continued for over a year, marked by Fabian's stalking, threats, and harassment. In 2017, Fabian got into trouble for physically attacking a classmate outside of school. Although the details of the incident were unclear, he was accused of mistreatment and assault, which could have led to jail time. However, the case was settled out of court, and Fabian was expelled from school. He was forced to complete his education through homeschooling. When Gabriella finally decided to end the relationship for good, Fabian became angry and desperate. He apologized and promised to change, begging her to take him back. However, when she refused, he began to stalk and harass her. He would show up at her school or home, even attempting to climb into her room through the window. He bombarded her with dozens of calls, texts, voice messages, and social media messages, trying to intimidate her into resuming their relationship. Gabriella was determined to end the relationship, despite Fabian's erratic behavior. His messages veered wildly from apologetic to threatening, but she remained resolute. However, Fabian's actions were unpredictable and frightening. He would often vanish for weeks, giving Gabriella a glimmer of hope that he had moved on, only to reappear and resume his harassment. Fabian's behavior was relentless and intrusive. He would follow Gabriella everywhere, showing up unexpectedly and causing public scenes. His outbursts were loud and intimidating, leaving Gabriella feeling anxious and fearful. As a result, she became reluctant to be alone, always seeking the company of friends or family after school. She would often meet her mother at work and travel home with her, or ask her father or uncle to accompany her on trips. This constant vigilance took a toll on Gabriella, leaving her exhausted and drained over several months. A devastating series of events began to unfold for the Elcano family when a burglar broke into the home of Federico's second wife, taking her life in a tragic turn of events. At the time, the children were at school and Federico was at work, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Fortunately, the perpetrator, a neighbor with a prior conviction, was apprehended immediately. Gabriella and her mother rallied around Federico, offering emotional support and helping him care for the children during this difficult time. Although Gabriella's thoughts were temporarily diverted from Fabian, who had gone missing around the same time, she remained focused on her own goals. She was busy preparing for entrance exams, hoping to secure a spot at one of Santiago's most prestigious universities, where she aspired to study journalism or advertising. However, this tragedy was only the beginning of a series of heartbreaking events that would soon befall the Elcano family. In May 2018, Fabian suddenly re-emerged, beginning a campaign of obsessive stalking that made Gabriella feel unsafe in all aspects of her life. He was able to access her property by climbing over the fence and even showed up at places she regularly visited, such as the supermarket and the mall. By early June, Gabriella was so alarmed by his behavior that she sent screenshots of her disturbing messages with Fabian to her two closest friends, including audio recordings where he explicitly threatened her and demanded they restart their relationship. Gabriella was secretly living in fear for her own safety and that of her loved ones, but she chose not to share her concerns with her family to avoid causing them unnecessary worry. On June 10, 2018, the Alino family came together to celebrate a milestone birthday, Carlos's 80th. Tragically, this joyful gathering would turn out to be the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening had begun on a happy note, with the house filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of a big family meal. As they celebrated Carlos's special day, everyone wished him good health and many more years to come. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and her uncle Rodrigo's children, but despite the festive atmosphere, she seemed somewhat preoccupied and distant. Her uncle noticed her unease and decided to approach her, asking if everything was okay and if something was troubling her. Gabriella gave a sad smile and shrugged, but didn't explain why she was nervous. Her uncle chose not to pry, thinking she would open up when she was ready. However, he later regretted not pressing her for more information. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and reassured her that she could always count on him for support. He then returned home with his younger children. Tragically, this was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and first wife alive. In the early hours of June 11th, a horrific crime took place. Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, climbed over the fence of his ex-girlfriend's house. He planned to sneak into Gabriella's bedroom through the window and attack her. However, just as he was about to enter, the lights turned on, and the back door creaked open. Carolina, who had been unable to sleep, had gotten up to investigate the noise. Fabian pounced on her, pushing her back inside, and began stabbing her repeatedly. Fabian brutally stabbed his Carolina 36 times, with most of the wounds inflicted on her chest, neck, and head. This attack was fatal and left her with no chance of survival. Carolina only managed to scream a couple of times before falling silent. The noise from the attack woke up Gabriella, who rushed downstairs to see what was happening. As she went down, she saw Fabian, covered in blood and clearly enraged. He caught hold of her and dragged her down. Gabriella was desperately trying to call the emergency services with her phone, but she couldn't make the call. In a horrific act, Fabian attacked Carolina and stabbed her once in the chest, piercing her heart and instantly killing her. He then moved her body to the kitchen. After the murder, Fabian tried to cover his tracks by wiping away his fingerprints and cleaning the bloody footprints. He also washed himself and the knife in the bathroom. After cleaning up, Fabian left the house quietly around 5:30 a.m. without being noticed by the neighbors. Following the event, Federico appeared unaffected. However, concerns grew when Carolina, typically a reliable and communicative colleague, missed work for 2 consecutive days without answering her phone. Her employer contacted Federico, asking him to find out what had happened to Carolina. When questioned, Federico was surprised and claimed to have called Carolina, but she was unreachable, as was Gabriella, whose phone was off. Next, Federico phoned his brother, Rodrigo, but Rodrigo stated that he had neither seen nor heard from the missing individuals since their friend's birthday. Following the phone call, Federico decided to pay a visit to Carolina's home. The property appeared uninhabited. Nonetheless, Carolina's vehicle remained in the garage. Without forcibly entering, despite possessing a spare key, Federico merely checked on the status of the property. Federico called the police and asked them to check the house, but he didn't enter himself because he was afraid of what he might find. The police officers were puzzled by this, especially since he had a key. When they finally entered the house at 11 a.m., they found the lifeless bodies of Carolina and Gabriella on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pools of blood. Despite the obvious fact that the women had been dead for over a day, Federico was overcome with grief and irrationally demanded that the police call an ambulance to save them. The police had to calm Federico down, but his behavior raised suspicions, and they took him outside to a police car for questioning. When he tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he became agitated and demanded to know why. It was then that he realized he was the main suspect in the double homicide. Federico was shocked and devastated by this turn of events, unable to comprehend how he could be suspected of killing his own daughter. Rodrigo arrived shortly after and was equally shocked to learn that his brother had not been released. He was also struggling to come to terms with the investigation revealed that Gabriella's friends reported that she was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend, Fabian. Screenshots of his threatening messages and voice recordings, which included a disturbing phrase, "It's easier to take her life than to let her go," were also obtained. This came as a shock to Federico, Gabriella's father, who recalled that Fabian seemed pleasant when they first met, despite his daughter's failed attempts to break up with him. The contrast between the heinous crime and the normalcy of Fabian's daily life, where he spent time with family and friends and posted light-hearted photos on social media, made his crime all the more inconceivable. After being taken into custody, Fabian responded to allegations with pretended astonishment and anguish, falsely claiming his innocence and feigning affection for Gabriella. Fabian had gotten rid of the object used to commit the murder and thrown away some clothes with blood on them. However, there were still small drops of blood on his shoes, and footprints matching his shoes were found at the scene of the crime. Additionally, 4 of Gabriella's classmates said they heard Fabian threaten her, saying it would be easier to kill her than let her go. Because of the evidence and what the witnesses said, Fabian admitted to the crime, but tried to make himself look like a lover who was deeply hurt. The defendant claimed that his intention was not to harm Gabriella, but rather to have a conversation with her. However, the situation escalated, and he ultimately treated her mother as an unwanted witness. He struggled to provide a reasonable explanation for bringing a hunting knife to the encounter, which was supposedly meant to be a conversation. Following the autopsy and other necessary examinations, the victims' bodies were released to their family for burial. A large crowd gathered at the funeral to pay their respects to the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriella was laid to rest in a white dress she had always wanted to wear but never had the chance to. Carolina was buried in a closed casket due to the severe mutilation of her face. Fabian's family hired a skilled lawyer who developed a strong defense strategy, aiming to secure a minimal sentence for his client. During the initial court hearings, the lawyer highlighted Fabian's young age and clean record, pointing out that the attack on his classmate had been resolved outside of court. However, the victim's family pushed for a more severe charge of femicide, which was rejected by the prosecution due to the specific requirements of Chile's law. Since Fabian and the victim were not in a romantic relationship at the time of the crime, the case did not meet the criteria for femicide. The lawyer also argued that Fabian had acted on impulse and was in a state of distress when he committed the crime. As a result, Fabian faced a potential 15-year sentence for the double homicide and assault charges. The victim's family, understandably, demanded the maximum punishment for Fabian. After the initial hearings, the judge gave both the prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested his release pending trial, but the judge denied this request, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's father was furious. He lost 2 loved ones to violent deaths. Now, the person responsible for the murders of his ex-wife and daughter might receive a lenient sentence. The defense lawyer tried to blame the victims, and the authorities seemed willing to accept this excuse. In response, Gabriella's father and uncle, along with women's rights groups, proposed Gabriella's Law. This law would broaden the definition of femicide to include intimate partner violence, regardless of whether they was married or cohabiting. The National Office for Women and Gender Equality soon joined the cause, actively pushing for the law. Although the bill faced opposition due to concerns that it could lead to new charges and stricter penalties for perpetrators already in prison, feminist groups nationwide rallied behind the Alino family. They organized marches and demonstrations in support of Gabriella's Law. In August 2019, a year and 3 months after the tragic murders, significant changes were made to Chile's femicide law. Known as Gabriella's Law, these amendments aimed to strengthen the country's response to violence against women. The law now defines femicide as any act of violence, injury, or murder committed against a woman due to hatred based on her gender, regardless of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. Additionally, the law considers it an aggravating circumstance if the victim is a minor or has health issues. In April 2022, Fabian Series went on trial for attacking his ex-girlfriend and her mother 4 years earlier. Thanks to Gabriella's Law, the defense had limited options. Fabian was charged with femicide under aggravating circumstances because one of the victims was a minor, as well as with double homicide and assault. On April 20th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was delivered, Federico and Rodrigo spoke to the court, expressing their gratitude to the judges for their fair decision. They acknowledged that no punishment could restore the life of their loved ones, Carolina and Gabriella, but emphasized that a life sentence for the perpetrator would serve as a safeguard, protecting other women from suffering a similar tragic. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in Southern California. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, with 2 older siblings, Michael and Michelle. Yvonne was especially close to her sister Michelle from a young age. Tragedy struck when Yvonne was 13, with the loss of her mother after a long illness. Her father James remarried a year later to Lillian, who turned out to be a kind and caring stepmother. Yvonne and her siblings developed a wonderful relationship with Lillian, who treated them as her own. Yvonne pursued a good education and experimented with various career paths, but her true passion lay in fashion design. She dreamed of turning her hobby into a successful business. However, her personal life was marked by misfortune. She had 2 failed marriages, the last one ending in divorce from Kevin Baldelli in 2007. Adding to her woes, Yvonne underwent surgery in her youth, which was followed by complications that left her unable to have children. After her second divorce, Yvonne lived a solitary life in her small apartment, where her only constant companion was her beloved dog, whom she lovingly referred to as her child. Despite her challenges, Yvonne remained close to her family, calling her father and sister daily and making it a point to visit them at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was approaching her 40th birthday, she met Brian Brimager, a married Marine with a young son. Despite being committed, Brian was open to an extramarital affair and confided in Yvonne about his unhappy marriage, stating that his only reason for not filing for divorce was the welfare of his child. Yvonne was taken by Brian's fit appearance and believed him. Having had a loveless marriage, she knew it was tough to leave, especially with kids. She didn't pressure him, thinking his child was the main issue. Little did she know, Brian was a charming liar, using his looks to juggle multiple relationships and fake promises. It became clear that Brimager, who was married, was having an affair with not one, but two women. One of them was Yvonne, and the other was Christine Verhoeven, a beautiful blonde with many influential contacts. Christine worked as an analyst at the White House. When Yvonne found out that her lover, Brian, was cheating on his wife with another woman, she decided to take action. Gathering her courage, she called Brian's wife to inform her that her husband was having an affair, not only with her, but also with another woman. This shocking news sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, although it's possible that she influenced his decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At the time, he was still serving in the Marines, but he had been thinking about ending his military career for a while. They seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of her new partner, questioning the sincerity of his feelings for her. In the summer of 2011, Brian started talking about making drastic changes to his life, including leaving the Marines, moving away from the city, and settling down on a tropical island. Yvonne shared his vision, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever he chose to go. She believed she had found the love of her life and adored him. By September, Yvonne decided to move to Panama's Carino Island, a tropical haven. Her dream was to open a boutique, creating custom outfits for tourists. In early September, Yvonne, Brian, and her dog flew to Panama, then took a ferry to Carino Island, renting an oceanfront house. The island's hot and humid climate attracted tourists, especially divers and surfers, year-round. Brian, a skilled guitar player since his teenage years, brought his instrument to the island with the intention of launching a music career, performing at various entertainment venues. Soon after settling in, he established connections with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a gig. He would play in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, and as a token of appreciation, the audience would often buy him drinks, leading to a habit of heavy daily drinking. Yvonne's business, on the other hand, struggled to take off, with sluggish sales and meager profits. However, she persevered and found work at one of the bars. She also adopted a second dog, which she found on the island, and decided to keep. She maintained daily contact with her sister Michelle Valenzuela, sharing every detail, but her messages became increasingly brief and somber, causing concern among her family. Initially, the island seemed like a paradise to them. Yvonne had hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic beach wedding. However, as time passed, Brian showed no signs of rushing into marriage. Their relationship quickly began to deteriorate. In early December, Michelle became concerned when she stopped receiving messages from her sister Yvonne. Then, on December 14, 2011, Michelle received an unexpected call from Yvonne's boyfriend Brian. He asked when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in Michelle's garage before he and Yvonne had traveled to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant Brian had returned to the US. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even reached out? Brian told Michelle that he had explained everything in an email he had sent a few days earlier. He also claimed that Yvonne had sent Michelle a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing. So, she turned to her email and discovered two unread messages, one from her sister Yvonne and one from Brian. Brian claimed in his message that Yvonne had left him for a new lover and moved to Costa Rica. However, A message supposedly from Yvonne stated that she had left him after discovering his infidelity, and that another woman, Christine Verhoeven, had given birth to his child. This message also claimed that Yvonne had met someone new and gone to Costa Rica with him. It seemed believable at first, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children, and news of her partner's infidelity could have been devastating. However, Yvonne was not one to act impulsively, and it was unusual that she hadn't contacted her sister to discuss her situation. The tone of the message from Yvonne also raised suspicions, as it didn't sound like her previous communications. Michelle suggested filing a missing persons report for Yvonne, but Brian was hesitant, claiming she was fine and capable of taking care of herself. He insisted she would come home on her own, but his nervousness and quick departure after picking up his vehicle raised suspicions. Shortly after, a message from Yvonne's phone arrived, stating she would return home in January for their father's birthday. This brought Michelle some relief, and she decided to wait, hoping Yvonne would come back as planned. By mid-January, Yvonne remained missing and hadn't reached out. Meanwhile, Michelle was stunned to learn that Brian had unexpectedly married Christine Verhoeven shortly before the new year began. What made this even more surprising was that he had only parted ways with his previous girlfriend a few weeks earlier. Michelle's concern for her sister's safety prompted her to report Yvonne missing to the police, as she suspected Yvonne hadn't actually gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry to Panama confirmed her fears, verifying that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Michelle's cousin, a programmer, helped trace the IP address of the emails supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December. The investigation revealed that the emails were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation grew increasingly alarming, Michelle quickly informed the police of her discovery. Valenzuela then reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and continued to send messages from her phone and email, impersonating her for about a month. Although there wasn't enough concrete evidence to arrest Brian at the time, law enforcement interviewed him and continued gathering proof of his guilt. It was discovered that Brian had asked Christine to marry him while he was still in Panama with Yvonne, promising they would soon return and raise their daughter together. However, Christine was not aware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on a business trip. 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her sister and niece conducted their own investigation and flew to Panama, where they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator who specialized in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events Brian had given. After listening to them, Winter immediately expressed his concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were low. With his extensive experience in such investigations and using his connections, Winter decided to pressure the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning Yvonne's disappearance into international news. A press conference was also organized, which included Yvonne's family members. After arriving in Panama, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends joined the search for Brian Baldelli and assisted in the investigation. Together, they thoroughly searched the tropical island of Carino, but found no trace of him. The dense undergrowth and swampy marshes, which were home to a wide variety of wildlife, hindered their search efforts. The family also questioned the island's residents about their knowledge of Brian and Yvonne and what they could reveal about the couple's behavior. It became clear that Brian and Yvonne had been drinking excessively and frequently got into loud public arguments, disregarding those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars, drinking and arguing. Moreover, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body, and she rarely removed her sunglasses, seemingly to conceal the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house they rented, confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Meanwhile, FBI agents brought in a specialized team of divers to search the waters surrounding the island for potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. From the start, Brian was the main suspect in the case, but there was no solid evidence to charge him with. He repeatedly denied any involvement, sticking to the same story that his ex-partner Yvonne had run off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012, that Brian was finally questioned by the police and a search of his home was conducted. At that time, his wife Christine was at work and Brian was unemployed, staying at home to take care of their child and enjoying his favorite hobby, playing golf. Brian claimed Yvonne left him after discovering his child with another woman, but became anxious when police found Yvonne's laptop on his table. The laptop had messages sent after she supposedly left, including a photo of Yvonne with a bruise and a conversation between Brian and his mistress about their secret affair. The search history showed queries about cleaning bloodstains and removing blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, as neither Aon's body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Aon didn't definitively prove his guilt. However, a discovery by Don Winter shed more light on the case. Before leaving Panama, Brimminger had sold a machete he owned to a buyer online. During their conversation, he jokingly said he had used the weapon once to finish off a stripper. Although the machete was seized for examination, it didn't initially yield any conclusive evidence. The long-awaited arrest was still pending. Meanwhile, the police had overlooked a crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance to make it seem like she was still alive. Before returning to the US, Brian went to Costa Rica and used the missing woman's card a few times, creating the illusion that she had fled there. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, eventually draining the card before discarding it. However, Brian didn't realize that he was caught on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after the woman vanished, her relatives, armed with evidence collected by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally succeeded in getting Brian arrested. At first, he was held on charges of lying and obstructing the investigation, as there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything more serious at that time. By then, Christine had given birth to a second son just a week before his arrest, making Brian a father for the second time. The authorities tried to have an open conversation with the suspect, offering him the opportunity to admit to the crime and reveal the location of Yvonne's body. However, Brian consistently denied any involvement. His lawyer also claimed that since there was no body or direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance, there was no proof of his guilt. In the swamp on the island of Quinero, a worker stumbled upon a gruesome discovery just 2 months after Brian's arrest. While taking a shortcut through the underbrush, the worker spotted an army backpack partially submerged in the water. Curious about what might be inside, the worker opened the bag, only to be met with horror at the sight of a human skull. The worker immediately notified the police, who responded and took the backpack into custody for further examination. Inside, they found fragments of a human body, as well as the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been deliberately dismembered, placed in the bag, and discarded in a remote area, likely intended to never be found. DNA testing later confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne. However, many of her limbs were missing. Further examination by pathologists revealed that Yvonne had suffered a brutal beating before her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. When the unique chop marks on the victim's bones were matched to the machete's blade, it confirmed that the body had been dismembered with this weapon, as each blade has a distinct signature, similar to human fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In 2014, Michelle Valenzuela got a cancer diagnosis, and after 6 months of intense treatment, realized it was futile. She dedicated her last months to seeking justice for her sister, testifying against Brian and submitting evidence to the court despite her weakening health. Brian assaulted Yvonne in a drunken rage after she discovered his affair, stabbing her to death. He then dismembered her body, killing her dogs, and hid the parts in a backpack in a swamp. Brian fabricated a story about Yvonne leaving him, gaining sympathy from locals, and even found a new girlfriend. However, during the trial, his girlfriend testified against him, and he was forced to admit his guilt, claiming self-defense despite evidence showing he was fully aware of his actions. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2035. At sentencing, credit was given for his prior service in the Marines, which spared him from a life sentence. Meanwhile, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, maintained her husband's innocence and pledged to stand by him no matter what. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fernandez Vivano was born on May 29, 1996 in Laguna, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. Valeria grew up with her older biological siblings, Michelangelo and Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother was a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising their children and creating a warm home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock to her. Although they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support, Valeria harbored resentment towards him. They would occasionally argue, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. After the divorce, Miguel Vivano remarried and had 2 more children, becoming Valeria's half-siblings. Despite this, Valeria, Daniela, and Michelangelo maintained warm relationships with them. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried, focusing on raising her children and later caring for her grandchildren from her older children. Valeria showed a strong-willed character, determination, and perseverance from a young age. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and demonstrated courage and a strong sense of justice, often putting others' needs before her own. Valeria's desire to help those around her, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice likely inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016 at the age of 20. The following year, she joined the Chilean police force and began working in the capital's serious crimes unit. From the start of her career, Valeria demonstrated herself to be a dedicated and passionate law enforcement officer, driven by a strong sense of justice. She was deeply committed to her job, performing her duties with diligence and always ready to respond to any situation at a moment's notice. Whether it meant leaving in the middle of the night to investigate a crime scene, pursuing suspects at personal risk, or providing emotional support to those who had lost loved ones, Valeria was always willing to go the extra mile. Her colleagues praised her as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she remained a consummate professional and trustworthy partner. Over nearly 5.5 years of service, Valeria received numerous accolades and awards, rapidly advancing in her career and earning the respect of her peers and the admiration of her superiors. A highlight of her career was representing her department in Spain, where she spent 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit, an experience that filled her with immense pride. By 2020, she had risen to the rank of assistant inspector. A 21-year-old rookie cop, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, joined the precinct where Valeria worked, fresh from the police academy. Valeria took him under her wing, becoming his mentor in his first job. A few months into their partnership, they got along fairly well. Not much is known about Lionel's upbringing, but it's believed he came from a wealthy and influential family with a high-ranking official as an uncle, which gave him a life of comfort and luxury. As a result, Lionel was self-absorbed, expecting everything to go his way. Valeria soon caught Lionel's attention, and he made several attempts to win her over, asking her out on dates, but she rejected him each time. Valeria was dedicated to her job and saw workplace romances as unprofessional. She was also strict with Lionel, viewing him as immature. Although Lionel was only 3 years younger, Valeria found his behavior childish and hoped to help him grow up. On May 29, 2021, Valeria turned 25. She celebrated her birthday at her mother's house, surrounded by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria intentionally left him out to avoid any potential awkwardness, as he had recently tried to rekindle their romance. When she talked to him about it, he only reaffirmed his feelings for her, which she wanted to keep private from their colleagues. Valeria looked upset despite the festivities. She was trying to conceal her sadness with a fake smile. The recent quarrel with her father had caused days of silence between them, and she had hoped he would put their differences aside and come to her party, giving them a chance to make up. But all he did was send a congratulatory message without even bothering to phone her. Jacqueline, Valeria's mother, noticed her daughter's distress and knew that the rift with her father was the cause of her sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she was convinced that Miguel would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would talk things through and reconcile. Tragically, Valeria and her father never got the chance to resolve their issues. 2 weeks later, she lost her life in a fatal shooting while on duty on June 13, 2021. Valeria was participating in street patrols and vehicle checks that night, searching for suspects related to a crime that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. The police had issued an alert for a white Kia Chato, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal who was likely armed and possibly accompanied by others in the car. Valeria was riding in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and immediately gave chase, without waiting for backup. The officers successfully intercepted and blocked the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivano jumped out of their vehicle, guns drawn, and yelled for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands raised. Just then, a single shot rang out, and in the ensuing chaos, Valeria clutched her side and fell to the asphalt beside the police car. Reinforcements arrived simultaneously, and her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but they couldn't fully comprehend what had happened or who had fired. The criminals took advantage of the momentary confusion, sped away, and escaped the scene. Despite the swift arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stop the bleeding, Valeria's life couldn't be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, Valeria passed away on the operating table, never regaining consciousness. Valeria's family rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, but they were too late. Miguel, her dad, was overwhelmed with grief and regret, haunted by their recent petty argument. His guilt was so intense, it put his own health at risk. Valeria died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals, hailed as a hero for giving her life to ensure others' peace and safety. Local media extensively covered the story, praising her courage and selflessness. The public was shocked and captivated by the arrests, and soon the suspects were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cupin and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not released due to his age. Both had previous convictions for minor crimes. In response to the arrests, Chile's president, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement promising that those responsible would face the full extent of the law. As the investigation progressed, some facts didn't add up. Valeria's body was returned to her family after the autopsy and buried in a capital city cemetery, with hundreds attending the funeral. her parents described the experience as a terrible nightmare. Notably, among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed more grief-stricken than anyone else. However, other colleagues reported that there had been recent tension between Valeria and Lionel, to the extent that Valeria didn't even invite him to her birthday celebration. Legal proceedings started right after the funeral against those arrested the next day. Initially, everyone thought the guilty ones were caught and proving it would be easy. But it soon became clear the investigation was flawed, with key details missed and evidence ignored. A month and a half after the officer's death, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged role in the incident. Valeria's parents were called to the prosecutor's office, expecting new evidence. Instead, they were devastated to learn from prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. Subsequent investigations showed that the fatal shot was fired from a service weapon held by one of Valeria's co-workers. A same-day ballistics test confirmed this, but the results were tampered with, and the bullet's characteristics, shape, caliber, and weight were incorrectly recorded in the evidence locker. Furthermore, the bullet had passed through Valeria's body, but it wasn't extracted. Instead, it was reported to have been extracted, and the entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were switched. The shot was fired into her back, not her abdomen. Furthermore, the detainees who were on trial, claiming to have confessed to their involvement and were on the verge of imprisonment, began filing complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and threats, and the pistol they had with them that evening was not even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the prior crime that prompted the interception plan that fateful night remained unconfirmed. A surprising twist emerged in the public's perception of Vivano, transforming her from a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to an innocent victim betrayed by her own colleagues. As a result, the main suspect shifted to Felipe Gilardo Ara, who was driving the police car, and Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, Vivano's partner, who was seated in the back. Both were immediately suspended from duty. On August 5th, it was discovered that the fatal bullet came from a police-issued weapon. A document surfaced showing examination results that implicated Lionel as the prime suspect, as he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands, a crucial finding that had been mysteriously left out of previous reports. Additionally, several other vital documents, including ballistics examination reports and the pathologist's conclusions, were improperly stored in an archive box that had not been thoroughly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was an accident, an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to conceal crucial evidence. The police officers involved in the operation to catch the criminals surprisingly became suspects in the murder of their fellow officer. Along with the suspects already arrested, they participated in a reenactment of the events of that night to clarify what had happened. In the reenactment, Philippe, who was driving, explained that he could only see Valeria, who was sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, when she got out of the car. Lionel, who was sitting behind them, also exited the vehicle, but Philippe couldn't see what he was doing. According to Philippe, Valeria took just a few steps before a shot was fired, causing her to fall to the ground. At that point, Lionel rushed to help the injured woman and provide first aid to try to save her life. Lionel gave a different account of what happened, saying that he and his partner Valeria got out of the patrol car at almost the same time, but she rushed forward immediately after the shot was fired. He denied shooting his colleague, Valeria, and claimed that Philippe, the driver, should have seen him trying to help Valeria and confirmed this. According to Lionel, he was the first to assist Valeria and tried to stop her bleeding to prevent her from dying. The investigation managed to reconstruct the events, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They found that Canales was behind his partner when the shot was fired, which corresponded with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, he was the only one with traces of gunshot residue on his hands. Lionel was arrested as prime suspect after secret reports and test results were released, while other detainees were freed on condition they stay local, lacking evidence to implicate them. But the officers' motives remained unclear. The prevailing theory is that a tragic accident occurred when an inexperienced young officer unintentionally fired his weapon while standing behind his partner. In a state of panic, he attempted to assist her. Later, when submitting his service weapon, he falsely claimed not to have fired it. However, the truth eventually came to light, exposing that influential relatives of the young officer exploited their power, wealth, and connections to conceal the incident, leading to fabricated reports, missing documents, contradictory evidence, and coerced testimony from detained individuals. Despite Canala's arrest, suspicions about Philippe's involvement persisted. Philippe was also armed with the same service weapons, was present at the scene, and could have accidentally fired the fatal shot. Additionally, Philippe had a history of using his weapon unjustifiably during an arrest, although no one was harmed on that occasion. The defense team, hired by Lionel's relatives, presented a theory that Philippe might have accidentally shot his colleague due to the identical service weapons, which could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Philippe's own testimony was inconsistent, and he claimed he couldn't accurately describe the events that took place. Despite this, the lack of gunpowder residue on the driver's hands suggested his innocence. Philippe's explanation that the residue came from when he was compressing the victim's wound was not believable, given that Valeria's blood stains remained on his hands. The investigation was widely criticized, and the victim's parents were left feeling desperate, leading to public outrage and a loss of trust in law enforcement. Following further investigation, Lionel remained the sole suspect. Lionel was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, in a surprise move, the Supreme Court later overturned the sentence, reducing his imprisonment to just 540 days. Valeria's family is now planning to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotton, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom, was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing." Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with 2 sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with 2 women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blanford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house, and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28th to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kelsey Smith. Kelsey Smith was born on May 3, 1989, in Overland Park, Kansas. Kelsey was the third of 5 children in a close-knit family. Her parents, Gregory and Missy Smith, raised her alongside her siblings, Steve, Lindsay, Kat, and Zach. Gregory Smith, the family patriarch, was a retired U.S. Navy veteran and had served in the police force for over 20 years. He was enjoying his retirement after a long and dedicated career. Kelsey grew up in a loving family environment, close to all her siblings. Kelsey's mother, Missy Smith, has dedicated her life to health care, working at a local hospital for many years. Despite her busy career, she has managed to balance work and family life well, raising her children and creating a warm family environment. Kelsey has been an active, outgoing, and creative child since she was a child. She enjoyed singing, dancing, and playing musical instruments, which she learned in music school. She was also active in school theater and choir performances. Kelsey is also passionate about sports, especially gymnastics and soccer. She often attends sporting events with her father and brother, cheering on her local team. With a great sense of humor and many talents, Kelsey has left a deep impression on those around her. Her love for animals, which began in childhood, inspired her dream of becoming a veterinarian after college. During her senior year of high school, Kelsey found work at the local symphony orchestra, where she played the clarinet at various city events. Through this job, she set a goal of saving enough money within 6 months to buy her first car, a 1987 Buick Regal. Although her parents were concerned that the car was an older model, they offered to contribute to the cost so that Kelsey could buy a newer car from the family budget. However, Kelsey was determined to buy her first car herself, using only her own savings, so she turned down their offer. The Kelsey family prioritized providing their children with a well-rounded education, focusing on education and personal development. They also instilled in their children a strong sense of discipline. The family had clear rules that everyone followed without exception, including sharing their plans and notifying each other if they would be out late. Kelsey demonstrates her adherence to these rules by being punctual, sharing her whereabouts with her parents, and informing them of her social activities. During her senior year, Kelsey began a romantic relationship with John Beer Smith. She describes it as deeply in love and like the relationships depicted in books or movies. They celebrated New Year's 2007 together and have been virtually inseparable ever since. John, who is 1 year older than her, appears to be a responsible and caring partner who treats Kelsey with respect. Both sets of parents approve of their relationship. In May 2007, Kelsey turned 18, graduated from high school, and was accepted into a prestigious university in Kansas to study veterinary medicine. This was one of the happiest times of her life. However, these happy days did not last long. Kelsey attended parties with her classmates to celebrate the end of high school and enjoyed spending time with John. At this point, Kelsey had achieved everything she wanted, got into her dream college, and was in a fulfilling relationship with a wonderful partner who was planning to propose. Her life was bright and happy. However, her disappearance from a shopping mall parking lot on June 2, 2007 changed everything. Kelsey and her boyfriend John were about to celebrate a big milestone, 6 months of dating. To make it special, John planned to propose with a custom-made engagement ring and had booked a romantic dinner for they of them. Unaware of John's plans, Kelsey also wanted to surprise him with a gift. That Saturday, she got ready, drove to a nearby Target Corporation store, and called her mother around 7 p.m. to say she had found the gift but needed a special bag for it. Her mother suggested checking the mall across the street from Target Corporation for a romantic gift bag. Kelsey thanked her mother for the advice and promised to be home soon. John was supposed to pick her up at 8 o'clock. However, after that conversation with her mother never heard from Kelsey again. Kelsey failed to return home. When John arrived at 8 with a large bouquet of flowers, he was shocked and frightened to discover Kelsey's absence. Her parents were equally terrified, as it was unlike Kelsey to ignore phone calls and texts. She had vanished in a busy area during the daytime, and no one had witnessed her disappearance. Kelsey's father and 2 eldest siblings began searching for her. They found her car parked at the Oak Park Mall, which gave them a glimmer of hope that she might still be inside the mall for some unknown reason. However, after thoroughly searching the mall, inquiring with salespeople and security guards, they concluded that Kelsey was not there. Upon returning to the car, they found it undisturbed with no signs of struggle or violence. Kelsey's father, a former police officer, decided not to touch anything to preserve potential evidence, as the car might be part of a crime scene. Kelsey's parents reported her missing to the police the same day, but the police were initially hesitant to start searching right away. They explained that since Kelsey was 18, she wouldn't be considered missing until 24 hours had passed. However, Kelsey's father, who had connections, insisted on an immediate search. He also asked hospitals in the city if a woman matching Kelsey's description had been admitted. That evening, The police interviewed Kelsey's family and John to confirm their whereabouts and rule them out as suspects, a standard procedure in missing person cases. The police also reviewed surveillance footage from the Target store, which showed Kelsey entering the store, browsing, making a purchase, and leaving while talking on the phone to her mother. She was asking her mother about a gift bag and then drove to the Oak Park Mall across the street, as her mother suggested. Kelsey parked her car near the side entrance of the mall, close to the wall. Her car was inspected by experts and appeared to be untouched from the outside. The gift for John was on the passenger seat, and her backpack with personal items, including a tablet and wallet with $300 in cash, was in the back. Since everything was still inside, robbery was quickly ruled out as a motive. It appears Kelsey only left with her credit cards and phone, as everything else was still in the car. There were no signs of struggle, blood, or damage, and the only unknown fingerprint was found on the driver's seatbelt, which did not belong to Kelsey, her family, or boyfriend. The investigation tried to track Kelsey's location through her mobile phone signal, but the device was inaccessible, possibly turned off or damaged. Despite this, it was possible to determine the last known location of the phone to narrow the search area. However, Verizon Communications, the wireless carrier, delayed providing the necessary data for several days. Instead of refusing to cooperate, the company kept promising to look into the matter, which effectively slowed down the process. In 2007, telecom companies were permitted to keep subscriber information from law enforcement, including police and FBI, without a court order. They based this on data protection laws. Not even situations where someone's life was in danger were exempt from this rule. A closer look at surveillance footage revealed a disturbing detail: a mysterious stranger was stalking Kelsey. The man initially did not attract attention because he kept a safe distance and did not interact directly with Kelsey. He was a Caucasian man between the ages of 20 and 25 with dark hair, short and a light beard, wearing a plain white t-shirt and black shorts. He followed Kelsey into the Target store about 30 seconds and continued to follow her from a distance as she browsed the various sections. The surveillance cameras captured his movements, and his behavior was later described by the prosecution as similar to a predator stalking its prey. After Kelsey left the store, the man followed her to the Oak Park parking lot in his Chevrolet truck, waiting until she was alone. It's possible that he overheard her conversation with her mother, as he was standing close by while she was on the phone. This may have allowed him to learn about her plans to visit the nearby shopping center. Unfortunately, Kelsey had parked her car in a poorly lit spot, next to a side door and a storage area, which made it difficult for the cameras to capture what happened next. As Kelsey sat in her car, the man parked his truck beside her and got out, wearing the same white t-shirt and black shorts. The stranger came up to her on the driver's side and, likely threatening to harm her, forced her to get behind the wheel of his Chevrolet. The truck then drove away in an unknown direction. Due to Gregory Smith's connections and experience, he believed that the more attention and coverage the case received, the higher the chances of finding their daughter and bringing the perpetrator to justice. As a result, the story was featured in both national and international media, including the popular show America's Most Wanted. When surveillance footage showed the stranger following Kelsey, the clearest images of his face were broadcast on the news, urging viewers to come forward if they recognized him. The police received calls from people claiming to have seen the man in various cities and states, although most of these reports turned out to be incorrect. Each lead was investigated. On June 6th, a woman named Mrs. Miggs called the police, stating that she recognized her neighbor, Edwin Hall, from the footage. Initially, she had hesitated to report it due to doubts, but the information about the truck removed her last doubts, as Edwin owned an old 1970s Chevrolet. On June 6, 2007, two significant events occurred in the investigation. The police received crucial data from Verizon Communications about the last known location of Kelsey's phone signal, This information pinpointed a specific cell tower, allowing the police to establish a 1.1-mile search radius to the north. Within 45 minutes of starting the search, Kelsey's body was found in the brush near Longview Lake, Missouri, about 30 meters from where she was abducted. The medical examiners determined that she had been brutally assaulted and strangled with her own belt. Kelsey's body was discovered without clothing, except for the belt used to strangle her. Her body was carelessly discarded in the bushes, partially covered with dry branches. Over the 4 days it lay exposed to the June sun, her remains were severely disfigured by insects and wildlife, making them almost unrecognizable. Despite the state of her remains, the examination confirmed that the body was indeed Kelsey Smith. The second major event on June 6 was the arrest of the main suspect. When police arrived at his residence, he remained calm and acknowledged that his friends called him Jack. He agreed to provide a statement at the police station. During the interrogation, Edwin Hull claimed he had never seen Kelsey before, even when shown a photograph of her. When presented with surveillance footage from the store that showed him following her, he insisted that he had only visited Target for personal reasons and hadn't noticed her. He suggested that their appearance together in the footage was just a strange coincidence. Despite being shown irrefutable evidence, Edwin seemed confident that he had covered his tracks and couldn't be held accountable. He had thoroughly cleaned his van and had used protection during the assault, leaving no DNA evidence behind. However, Edwin agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provided his DNA sample and fingerprints. A crucial piece of evidence emerged when his fingerprints matched those found on Kelsey's car's seatbelt buckle. A thorough search of his home also revealed a hidden air pistol with Kelsey's DNA on the barrel. Edwin was officially charged with abduction, assault, and murder. A jurisdictional issue arose, as Kelsey was abducted in Kansas but her body was found dead in Missouri. This was important because it affected the potential sentence. In Missouri, Edwin faced the possibility of a capital punishment trial and sentence. Edwin realized the seriousness of his situation and, after consulting his lawyer, decided to confess to the crime and provide details in the hope of a reduced sentence. He described how he had noticed Kelsey entering the store and followed her, getting close enough to overhear her phone conversation about visiting the shopping center across the street. Edwin waited until Kelsey was alone, then followed her to the adjacent parking lot. He was pleased when she parked in a secluded spot near the side entrance. He got out of his vehicle, armed with a pistol, and waited for Kelsey to return to her car. As she was getting into the driver's seat, he prevented her from closing the door. Kelsey had already pulled out the seatbelt, and Edwin allowed her to buckle up, leaving his fingerprint on it. Edwin then put the pistol barrel in Kelsey's mouth, threatening her to move to his vehicle's driver's seat. Kelsey drove Edwin's truck while he aimed the gun at her and gave her directions. When they reached a remote area at the state border, Edwin ordered Kelsey out of the truck and led her into the bushes. There, he assaulted and strangled her with the belt, then covered her body with branches. He thoroughly cleaned his truck to eliminate any evidence of Kelsey's presence, including fingerprints and DNA. He then hid the pistol, which had Kelsey's saliva on it, in his home, believing it would never be discovered. When questioned about his motive, Edwin failed to provide a clear answer, instead making a comment about the victim's physical appearance. During the investigation, several other women and girls came forward, revealing a pattern of abuse and harassment by Edwin. Further investigation uncovered more instances of Edwin's wrongdoing, including coercing a 14-year-old neighbor into intimacy, harassing a waitress, and fleeing a restaurant without paying. These findings led to additional charges, including corruption of a minor, harassment, and theft. Edwin's lawyer attempted to garner sympathy from the court by highlighting his client's troubled childhood, past victimization, and unstable upbringing. Despite these efforts, the defense was unsuccessful. Edwin's lawyer was the only person to speak in his defense and show support. Notably, Edwin's wife attended all court hearings but chose not to defend her husband, instead sitting quietly in the background. On September 16, 2008, a Johnson County judge sentenced Edwin Hall to 27 life sentences without parole. After hearing the verdict, the defendant apologized to the Kelsey family for his actions and broke down in tears. He is now serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Kansas. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Stern. Sarah Elizabeth Sarah was born on March 24, 1997, in Neptune City, New Jersey, to Michael and Susan Sarah. As their only child, Sarah received all the love and attention from her parents, who had been unable to have more children due to health issues. Sarah grew up to be a lively, cheerful, and outgoing child. She was involved in various activities, including school theater, photography, drawing, swimming, and softball. Her passion was art, and she aspired to become an artist or designer. After graduating from high school, Sarah enrolled in a local college to pursue her dream. Tragedy struck in the autumn of 2013 when Sarah's mother, Susan, passed away after a long battle with cancer. Despite periods of remission, the disease ultimately took its toll. This devastating loss was a tremendous shock to the family, particularly for Sarah, who was extremely close to her mother. After a period of struggling with depression, Sarah began to support her ailing father and care for their beloved dog, Buddy. As time passed, her life started to improve, and she set goals for the future. Upon graduating from college, Sarah planned to apply to a prestigious university in New York. Before pursuing further education, she hoped to travel the world, with a particular interest in visiting Canada and possibly even living there for a while. Her father, Michael Sarah, frequently traveled out of state for work, often for weeks at a time. However, he never worried about leaving Sarah alone, as she was a grown and independent young woman, and their town was considered safe. But on the night of December 3, 2016, around 2:30 a.m., an unsettling incident occurred. A concerned citizen reported an abandoned vehicle on the Belmar Bridge along Highway 35, prompting the police to become involved. The area was usually deserted at night, which made the lone, empty vehicle stand out. A taxi driver, who was taking a shortcut home across the old bridge on the outskirts, noticed the car parked on the side of the road. He stopped to see if anyone needed assistance, but found the vehicle empty with no one around. Concerned that the driver might have jumped into the water below, a tragic occurrence that had happened before in this spot, the taxi driver called the police. Police officers responding to the scene found the car's keys in the ignition and no signs of blood or struggle, leading them to initially believe that the owner may have intentionally left the car on the bridge to jump into the river. To investigate further, they checked the car's ownership and discovered it belonged to 85-year-old Lily Sarah, who lived in a nearby town. When officers visited Lily's home, they found her alive and well. She explained that she hadn't driven the car in years due to poor eyesight, and her 19-year-old granddaughter, Sarah, was the frequent driver. Lily tried to contact Sarah but was unable to reach her because her phone was turned off. She then provided the officers with her son's address, where Sarah lived, and informed them that Sarah was likely alone, as her father was out of town for work and wouldn't return until the following week. Sarah was nowhere to be found at her home. Although the back door was open, an initial search of the house didn't turn up any signs of foul play. However, they did find the family dog locked in one of the bedrooms, whining. Despite the open back door, there were no signs of disarray or struggle, and no evidence of an intruder. As the news of her disappearance spread, Sarah's father, Michael, rushed back home on the next available flight. Upon his arrival, he confirmed that everything was still in its place and nothing was missing. Notably, All of Sarah's personal belongings, including her passport, driver's license, and mobile phone, were still at the house. The police shared their initial concerns with Michael, suggesting that Sarah might have gone to the nearby bridge with intentions to harm herself. They asked if he had noticed any warning signs of suicidal tendencies or self-harm. Michael revealed that Sarah had struggled with depression after her mother's passing, but had made a full recovery with the help of loved ones and her studies. In fact, Sarah had big plans for her future, aspiring to become a designer and travel the world. To piece together what happened, the police needed to know who Sarah had contact with on the day she vanished, what conversations she had, and who saw her last. The first witnesses to come forward revealed that Sarah had spent most of December 2nd with her childhood friend, Liam McAtasney. As the last person to see her, Liam was a crucial part of the investigation. The police quickly decided to speak with him to gather more information and reconstruct the events of that day. When the police arrived at the McAtasney residence, they met with Liam's mother, who told them that her son was sleeping after a night shift. The officers asked her to wake Liam, who seemed confused about the situation. Once he was informed about Sarah's disappearance, Liam confirmed that they had spent the previous day together and agreed to go to the police station to give a statement. Liam shared that he and Sarah had attended college classes together that morning, but they decided to skip the last 2 lectures and go to her place to unwind instead. At her house, they played video games, chatted about their plans, and socialized. They briefly left her house twice to pick up food and visit a local supermarket. Liam left Sarah's house around 7 p.m. to go to his night shift job and did not see her again. Liam was also asked if Sarah had been struggling with any mental health issues. He explained that she had been battling deep depression since her mother passed away. He shared that Sarah often felt hopeless, wanting to escape or end her life, but he did not think that this meant she was planning to harm herself. He noted that she also struggled to connect with her father, leading to additional emotional strain. Liam considered it possible that Sarah's emotional state may have contributed to her disappearance. However, it was also clear that Sarah was planning a trip to Canada around that time and had recently exchanged money in preparation for her travels. Liam's testimony gained credibility when Canadian dollars were found in her bedside table drawer, though the amount was relatively insignificant. Preston Taylor, a close friend from high school, corroborated Liam's story. Preston mentioned that Sarah had struggled with depression, leading him to wonder if she had fled to Canada or taken her own life by jumping off a bridge. His emotional testimony underscored the strong bond he shared with Sarah. Despite these accounts, investigators soon ruled out the possibility of Sarah fleeing the country due to the absence of her passport. As a result, the search focused on the more distressing possibility of her having jumped to her death. A comprehensive search operation was launched along the river, involving divers, specialized equipment, and hundreds of volunteers, including police. However, strong currents posed a challenge, potentially carrying her remains or personal belongings far from the bridge, and thorough searches of both riverbanks were necessary to try to find any signs of Sarah. Among the volunteers searching for Sarah were her friends Liam and Preston. Despite their efforts, the search yielded nothing, prompting law enforcement to re-question those closest to Sarah. It was during this process that discrepancies in their accounts began to emerge. Sarah's friends and classmates described her as a happy and carefree person, with no signs of depression or problems with her father, whom she often spoke about affectionately. However, Liam and Preston's behavior after Sarah's disappearance raised eyebrows. They initially acted as if they had lost a loved one, gaining sympathy from many. But over time, their behavior seemed increasingly insincere, as if they were performing for an audience. The fact that Liam and Preston had only recently become close, about a month before Sarah's disappearance, raised suspicions and led the police to re-question them. Liam was visibly shaken when he was brought in for further questioning. The investigator asked him about his relationship with Sarah and Preston, and Liam explained that the three of them had grown up together on the same street and attended the same school. They were extremely close, sharing their deepest secrets and dreams with each other. Preston had even taken Sarah to prom, but they had never been romantically involved. Liam clarified that his relationship with Sarah was more than just friendship. He considered her like a sister. They had even listed each other as siblings on social media. Sarah had confided in Liam about her family, telling him that her mother had left her a significant amount of money in a safety deposit box at the bank. Sarah didn't trust her father, who claimed a right to the money, so she planned to retrieve it soon and move to Canada. However, when the investigator shared this information with Michael, Sarah's father, he provided a conflicting account. According to Michael, his wife had been saving money for Sarah's future since her birth, setting aside funds for education, a wedding, or a down payment on a house. The money had been stored at home in a shoebox, containing old and worn-out bills, but no one had thought much of it at the time. After Sarah's mother passed away, her father gave her a large sum of money, which he advised her to put in the bank. Sarah took his advice, dividing the money between her checking account for everyday expenses and a safe deposit box for the rest. She intended to use the money for graduate school and travel. Michael claimed he wasn't interested in the money for himself. When investigators discovered that Sarah had access to a significant amount of money, they began to suspect that her disappearance might be related to her finances. They decided to look into her financial transactions, including her bank account and safe deposit box. Their investigation revealed that Sarah had withdrawn a large amount of cash from an ATM just a few days before she disappeared, and had also accessed her safe deposit box at the bank around the same time. The detectives were in for another surprise when they reviewed the bank surveillance footage, which showed that Sarah was not alone when she visited the bank on December 1st. Liam was with her, raising questions about why he hadn't mentioned this earlier. When asked about it, Liam explained that Sarah had confided in him about her banking activities and had asked for his accompaniment because she was nervous about carrying a large sum of cash. Liam's hesitation was evident, but his story seemed plausible, and his demeanor appeared genuine. Further investigation led to the discovery of a security camera in a neighboring house that had captured footage of the street and Sarah's yard. The footage confirmed that Liam had stayed at Sarah's house until 7 p.m., then left for work and didn't return. Meanwhile, the silver sedan was seen leaving the garage around 11 p.m. This new information added a chilling twist to the already disturbing case. In a surprising turn of events, an acquaintance of Sarah's named Anthony walked into the police station about a month after her disappearance. Unaware of the recent events, Anthony had been out of town for several weeks. He shared a peculiar story that sent shockwaves through the investigation. It turned out that Anthony had gone to school with Sarah, Liam, and Preston, and after graduation, he had pursued a passion for filmmaking, keeping in touch only with Liam, who also shared his interest in cinema. Anthony remembered that about a month and a half before Sarah disappeared, Liam visited him and they spent an evening brainstorming ideas for a horror movie aimed at teenagers. Liam came up with a plot about a girl who shares a secret about a large sum of money with her friend, who then gains her trust and kills her, dumping her body in a river. Anthony thought the idea was good, and they even wrote a few pages of the script. After that, Anthony moved on to another project and forgot about the story. He then left town to work on a film as a camera assistant. When he returned, Liam unexpectedly called him and asked if the police had contacted Anthony. Anthony was surprised and had not heard that Sarah was missing, so he decided to go to the police. After hearing a new witness's testimony, the police asked Anthony to try to get Liam to confess by drawing him into a conversation. Anthony agreed and a plan was set in motion. He would invite Liam to work on a project that required renting expensive camera equipment, which they would pretend they couldn't afford. Liam had ambitions of being in a movie, so the police thought he would likely jump at the chance to make his dream a reality, especially if it meant using the money he had taken from Sarah. They decided to test him by setting up a sting operation. Anthony, a friend of Liam's, was asked to pretend to have connections in the film industry and offer him a deal. Anthony met with Liam and suggested they discuss the details in person. Unbeknownst to Liam, a hidden camera had been installed in Anthony's car to capture any incriminating evidence. When Liam got into the car, he looked around nervously, as if he suspected something was off. He then handed Anthony an envelope containing $2,000 in cash and asked if it was enough to rent the equipment they would need for the movie. Anthony agreed, and then asked Liam where he had gotten the old bills. Liam hesitated before admitting that the money belonged to Sarah, and that he and his friend Preston had taken it from her house because, in his words, the dead don't need it. Although Liam didn't provide any further details, his admission was enough for the police to arrest him and his friend Preston on suspicion of a crime. Preston, Liam's accomplice, quickly began cooperating with the authorities and struck a deal with the prosecution. He told them that he hadn't directly participated in the crime, but had helped Liam cover his tracks and get rid of Sarah's body. According to Preston, Liam started plotting to take Sarah's money as soon as he found out about it. Sarah had kept her inheritance a secret, even from her closest friend, for a long time. However, when she began making serious plans for a trip to Canada, Liam asked her how she intended to pay for it, and she revealed that she had inherited a sum of money from her mother. Liam then persuaded her that it would be safer to store the money in a home safe rather than a bank vault, and he urged her to withdraw the cash. Liam, determined to carry out his plan, waited for the perfect opportunity while Sarah's father was away on a business trip. He enlisted the help of his friend Preston, promising him $25,000 in exchange for his assistance. Liam had Sarah withdraw a large sum of money from the ATM, but didn't check the exact amount. They spent the next day together, waiting for the right moment to strike. When the time came, Liam separated Sarah from her dog by locking it in another room, then approached Sarah from behind and attempted to strangle her. However, the crime proved more difficult than Liam anticipated. Sarah, being physically strong and athletic, resisted fiercely, resulting in an intense struggle until she eventually lost consciousness. But despite his best efforts, Liam was unable to determine whether she had truly succumbed. Sarah continued to show signs of life, leaving Liam to prolong his efforts to ensure her demise. This took nearly 30 minutes. Only when Liam was certain Sarah was dead did he leave her house, going about his normal routine by heading to work. He then had Preston follow up on his original instructions, no doubt aiming to ensure their sinister act would go unnoticed. Liam McAtasney snuck into Sarah's house through the back door, avoiding the camera's view, and dragged the body to the garage. He then cleaned up the room to remove any evidence. A couple of hours later, he returned to the house, took a small safe from Sarah's room, and placed the body in the car. Liam drove away carefully to avoid being caught on the neighbor's camera. He met Preston at a bridge, where they transferred the body to Preston's car and then disposed of it in a nearby river. After disposing of the body, they cleaned the car and drove back to Liam's house to divide the stolen money. However, they were disappointed to find only $110,000 in the safe. They decided to be cautious and not spend the old bills immediately to avoid raising suspicion. Preston buried the safe in a local park, and they only spent the money Sarah had withdrawn from her account. During the trial, Preston confessed to the crime, but Liam denied any involvement and tried to shift the blame to his friend. Liam's lawyer also claimed his client was innocent, suggesting that Preston acted alone. The case was complicated by the fact that Sarah's body was never found. When police searched Liam's house, they found a small key that fit the buried safe, which was identified by Preston as evidence of Liam's guilt. The trial of Liam McAtasney lasted over 2 years. Despite the fact that Sarah Stern's body was never found, the evidence presented in court proved McAtasney's guilt. This evidence included a script he had written months before the crime, a key to a safe found in his home, incriminating statements he made in the car, and old bills he had given to someone. Furthermore, fingerprints belonging to Liam and his accomplice, Preston Taylor, were found inside the safe. A co-worker of Liam's also testified that he had been absent from work for a few hours on the night of the crime and had asked someone to cover for him. As a result of the trial, Liam was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Preston, who had not directly participated in the crime, received an 18-year sentence for obstructing justice and hindering the investigation. Preston will be eligible for parole in 15 years. Unfortunately, Sarah Stern's body has still not been found. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nancy Paula Reyes. Nancy Paula Reyes Gores was born on April 13, 1991, in the small village of Granados in Guatemala. She grew up in a poor family with 4 siblings. Her parents, Jorge and Pren Gorzi, worked hard to provide for their children's education, hoping they could have a better life. Nancy attended school and later enrolled in the university in Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was an exceptionally diligent student who earned top academic accolades. Despite her academic success, she struggled to find a promising career. During her studies, she worked as a cashier in a supermarket and was later promoted to administrator, but her career advancement stopped there. During her university years, Nancy was in a relationship with a young man and had 2 daughters. However, the relationship didn't work out, and they separated. The father did not financially support his children. Nancy continued to live with her parents, working at a supermarket, but saw no future prospects. With barely enough money for essentials, change was necessary. In 2013, her older sister moved to the United States, found a good job, got married, and settled well. Inspired by her sister's success, Nancy decided to transform her life. She chose to relocate to Europe, specifically Spain. At the time, she couldn't afford a one-way plane ticket or initial expenses. Nancy worked hard for years, saving enough to make her dream a reality. In July 2018, Nancy bought a ticket to Madrid, reassuring her parents that she would stay in touch regularly. Upon arrival, she planned to secure housing and a job. She brought a few thousand euros to cover initial expenses, such as renting a room and basic necessities, until she found stable employment. When Nancy left, she was 27 years old, and her daughters, who remained with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. However, Nancy didn't stay in Madrid for long. She moved to Barcelona and later to Cadreal, a city in the Spanish province of the same name. Nancy maintained regular contact with her family, calling home almost daily to check on their well-being and sending money back to support them. Despite not having a stable job, Nancy managed to make a living through various odd jobs, including cleaning for affluent families and caring for the elderly and sick. She never complained about her hardships. Instead, she told her family that Europe offered better opportunities and that she could earn more than she would have in her home country, even if she worked non-stop with no days off. It seemed Nancy was content with her lives. She even mentioned plans to bring her daughters to Spain once she had saved enough to rent a spacious home for the whole family. A significant romance developed in Nancy's life. Initially, she didn't reveal much about her personal life, citing a busy work schedule. However, in the spring of 2020, she told her parents that she had met a man named Carlos Andres Bustamante and started a romantic relationship with him. They met by chance while Nancy was searching for a new place to rent. As they navigated their challenges, they grew closer and eventually moved in together. Carlos, who was a year older than Nancy, didn't have a steady income at the start of their relationship and relied on odd jobs to get by. As a result, Nancy became the primary breadwinner, covering housing costs, bills, and often providing Carlos with money for his personal expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so they believed everything was fine and that she had found a good partner in Carlos, with whom she lived a happy and fulfilling life. Around that time, Nancy's two younger brothers also moved to Spain, and she kept in touch with them. She was especially close to her youngest brother, Dennis, who had met Carlos and thought he was likable. In late June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to relocate to Santander, a coastal city in northern Spain. When Nancy spoke to her family on the phone, she mentioned that the climate was better and there were more job opportunities. However, issues began to arise in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried to keep to herself. Carlos was jealous, hot-headed, and cruel. He was content with being financially supported by Nancy and lacked ambition. What's more, he had a problem with alcohol and occasionally used illicit substances. Although he frequently promised to quit and find a stable job, Nancy started to doubt whether she should continue the relationship. When Nancy discovered she was pregnant, Carlos seemed overjoyed and promised a better life. However, his behavior worsened. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from Nancy or his mother. Carlos also started physically abusing Nancy, who tried to hide this from others. On August 12, while Nancy video chatted with her parents, Carlos yelled at her, demanding that she tell him who she was talking to. Despite her explanation, he snatched the phone, verified the caller, and then threw the phone onto a chair before walking away. The next day, Carlos repeated this behavior, grabbing the phone from Nancy while she spoke to her family. He insulted and threatened her, leaving Nancy frightened. However, she told her relatives that Carlos's behavior was due to jealousy and insisted that everything was fine. Her parents urged her to contact the police, but Nancy believed she could handle the situation herself. On August 17, Nancy had a concerning phone conversation with her sister. She stated that if anything happened to her, Carlos would be responsible. Although her words were alarming, she didn't explain further and instead asked her sister to care for her children if necessary. This was the last time Nancy's sister heard from her. Nancy, who was pregnant, mysteriously vanished on August 20th. At around 2 p.m., she texted her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did. It was unusual for her not to follow through on her promise or respond to her family's calls. When her family tried to contact Carlos, he didn't answer his phone either. The situation was worrying, especially since they had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there. Nancy's brothers lived on the other side of the country, making it difficult for them to check on her immediately. A few days later, a suspicious message was sent from Carlos's phone, stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to separate. According to the message, Nancy had packed her belongings and left to find her own apartment, was ignoring Carlos's calls, and he had no idea where she was. Nancy brothers suggested that Carlos come to Ciudad Real so they could report Nancy missing to the police together. Carlos agreed but didn't show up or file the report. He also stopped communicating with Nancy's family. Nancy's relatives reported her disappearance to the police themselves. Meanwhile, her brothers found Carlos's mother's, Sandra Bustamante, address through Nancy's friends. When they visited Sandra and explained the situation, she burst into tears. She confessed that she suspected her son was capable of harming Nancy, but didn't provide any details. Sandra didn't know where Carlos and Nancy were. Carlos wouldn't answer her calls, only sending brief messages telling her not to ask questions and to give him time. The next day, Sandra is questioned at the police station about Nancy's disappearance and the whereabouts of her son, Carlos. Sandra shared the same information she had told Nancy's brothers the day before and showed the police a long text message Nancy had sent her before she went missing. In the message, Nancy begged Sandra not to give Carlos any money, no matter what sad stories he might tell her. Nancy said Carlos would spend the money on alcohol and drugs, which made him aggressive and cruel. He had no intention of finding a job or overcoming his addictions, and his behavior was becoming increasingly threatening. As a result, Nancy was considering leaving him and thought it would be better to end things before anyone got hurt. The investigation also uncovered a disturbing fact about Carlos. He had been convicted of causing physical harm several times before. One of his first victims was his own mother, whom he severely beat when he was 17 years old. At the time, he was given probation. However, after leaving his family's home, he served short sentences for assaulting women he lived with and tried to have relationships with. The investigation was just getting underway, but within the first few days, several intriguing details came to light that suggested the union between Carlos and Nancy was troubled from the start. Carlos had a history of aggression, was unemployed, struggled with addiction, had a criminal record, and was prone to uncontrollable rage. Nancy's occupation wasn't as straightforward as she claimed. Her work generated substantial income, more than a housekeeper or caregiver could earn. In reality, Nancy offered escort services to wealthy individuals, including Spanish and other tourists, which is why she moved to Santander. Carlos initially accepted Nancy's occupation as it supported them financially. However, upon learning of her pregnancy, he became consumed by doubts about the child's paternity and grew intensely jealous of her continued work. His behavior became erratic, fluctuating between forbidding her from interacting with men and pressuring her to work for money. The man spent the money he took from his mother solely on himself and his vices. A disturbing discovery was made in a rented apartment, where Nancy and Carlos had been missing for nearly a week. Although Carlos had been in contact, he only sent messages and didn't reveal his location. On August 26th, the police finally obtained a warrant to search their empty rental apartment in Santander, and what they found was shocking, leaving no doubt that Nancy was deceased. Blood was found throughout the apartment, with some attempts to clean it up. However, it was still visible in many areas. Further investigation revealed fragments of bones, hair, skin, and internal organs in the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet. Forensic analysis confirmed that these remains belonged to the missing woman, Nancy. Although Nancy's body was not found in the apartment, evidence suggested that she had been brutally murdered and dismembered in the bathroom. Her remains were likely disposed of elsewhere. Carlos became the prime suspect in the case, but his whereabouts were unknown. A package for a small hatchet was found in the apartment with Carlos' clear fingerprints on it. Security footage from a local hardware store showed Carlos purchasing the hatchet, rubber gloves, and large trash bags on August 20th. He bought a small cart from an elderly vendor, who instantly recognized him from a photo. This led to his arrest and the start of a search for the body. The next day, Carlos went to a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had no involvement, stating that he and Nancy had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left the town in an emotional state and was unaware of any events involving Nancy afterward. He suggested that Nancy might have been attacked when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. However, his story was unconvincing, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet packaging. In the following days, police thoroughly searched nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline with the help of dogs, but found no sign of Nancy. They then tracked Carlos's movements from August 20th to 26th using his mobile phone signals. The results showed he spent 3 days traveling along the coast, visiting the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was evident that Carlos attempted to conceal his actions. The investigation continued in Santander. On August 20th, surveillance footage revealed Carlos walking towards a large natural forest park in the evening. He returned to his apartment late at night and then exited again with a cart containing irregularly shaped bags. Carlos vanished from view upon entering the wooded area due to limited camera coverage. He reappeared later with a much lighter cart. After proceeding towards the railway tracks, he returned significantly lighter, indicating where the body might be. However, one question remained unanswered: where was the child? It wasn't until September 16th that authorities discovered bags containing severely decomposed human remains in dense underbrush on a hillside. The remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gores, which had been divided into 20 parts using a hatchet, as revealed by security camera footage. While all items transported in the cart were recovered, something was still missing. Nancy's 4-month-old fetus was not found among the remains. The victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed severe injuries from a knife and hatchet. This suggests that the perpetrator removed the fetus and got rid of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos denied being involved and gave conflicting statements. He tried to blame someone else, but the victim's blood was found on his clothes and shoes, which he had tried to wash off. Even though Carlos wouldn't admit to the crime, investigators figured out what happened. Experts think that on the afternoon of August 20th, the man got into an argument with his pregnant partner. He then brutally beat and strangled her in the kitchen, where blood was found on the floor and walls. Carlos moved Nancy's body to the bathroom. Afterward, he went shopping at a hardware store and the market. Using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts in the bathroom. He placed the pieces into bags, loaded everything into a cart, and then went to the park to look for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. During his trial, Carlos denied his guilt and claimed he loved Nancy. The whereabouts of the fetus he removed from her body remain unknown. From the time of the crime until his arrest in Madrid, Carlos lived off the money he stole from Nancy. He spent the money daily in bars across various cities. It took law enforcement nearly 2 years to investigate, gather evidence, and find witnesses, and the murder trial is scheduled to start in July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Carlos received a prison sentence of 25 years and 6 months. He was also required to pay €150,000 in compensation to Nancy's parents and daughters. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her life took a drastic turn when her father passed away when she was just 10 years old. Overwhelmed by grief, her family moved to live with relatives in Whitby, United Kingdom. However, the move did not bring the peace they had hoped for, and they eventually returned to South Africa. When Carmen turned 18, she decided to leave behind with her relatives and later relocated to London to pursue her education. She earned a master's degree in marketing and quickly became known for her charismatic and outgoing personality. Carmen formed strong bonds with many people and became a loyal friend and companion. However, living in a big city like London came with its expenses, and Carmen had to work hard to maintain a decent standard of living. By day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and by night, she worked part-time at a gentleman's club. Although her career choices may have raised eyebrows, Carmen was a woman of principle and never compromised her values. She conducted herself with dignity and earned the respect of her clients. It was during her time at the club that she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Brad was born in April 1978 in New Zealand to parents who separated when he was just 9 years old. He stayed with his mother and later moved to Australia. Brad graduated from university in 2001 with a degree in construction engineering. He was then offered a job as a chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK by a prominent construction company. To navigate the complex's high-stakes negotiations and enhance his professional status, Brad sought the services of a gentleman's agency, where he met Carmen. She was intelligent, tall, and beautiful, with striking dark eyes and black hair. However, Brad's demanding career and ambitious nature left him little time for a serious relationship. Despite this, Brad and Carmen got along well after a dinner, and their casual interactions eventually blossomed into a solid friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened into a romance, and they began living together. Their relationship was built on mutual trust, care, and support. When Carmen got pregnant, Brad decided it would be better to go back to New Zealand, a country with cleaner air and a more laid-back lifestyle. In March 2005, they returned to Auckland. After the birth of their son Jack, they experienced immense happiness. They prioritized Jack's safety and well-being, making sure he had everything he needed for a happy childhood. However, the arrival of their son brought significant challenges to their relationship. The first problems arose in the relationship between Carmen and Brad due to disagreements on how to raise their child, causing tension and instability. After 3 years, they decided to go their separate ways, but shared joint custody of their son, Jack. The breakup was challenging for both, but they made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for Jack's sake. Carmen and Jack eventually moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. With time, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started a new life without Brad. In 2008, she and her son relocated to a house on a street near Brad's, so Jack could be close to his father. Having lost her own father at a young age, Carmen wanted to ensure Jack always had a father figure in his life. Despite her decision to live near Brad, Carmen's friends and family believed she and Brad still had a good friendship, but in reality, they only spent time together when it was related to Jack. As time passed, life continued for Carmen. After parting ways, Carmen and Brad each attempted to move on. Brad resumed his career as a construction engineer and, in May 2009, began a new relationship, which ultimately led to an engagement. Meanwhile, Carmen devoted herself to raising their son and, much to Brad's dismay, returned to her work at a gentleman's club. This choice troubled Brad. Carmen repeatedly presented Brad with ultimatums, but he dismissed her requests, focusing on his impending marriage and plans for fatherhood once again. This marked the beginning of adjustments to his financial commitments, specifically affecting the alimony payments for the maintenance of their son, Jack, which Brad made in accordance with their agreement. However, Carmen viewed the financial constraints as a catalyst in an escalating series of conflicts. Tensions escalated until March 19, 2010, when a domestic violence incident occurred. Police responded to a neighbor's call about a dispute and mediated the situation. As a result, Carmen received a formal warning from law enforcement. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to discuss a new school for Jack and to sign a written agreement for child support. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and asked Brad to leave, yelling that Jack was not his son as he departed. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to contact Carmen again, but she did not respond. On July 13, 2010, Brad reported Carmen missing to the police, who began searching for her. Through video footage and interviews with neighbors, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance. They discovered that on June 29, a surveillance camera at a nearby supermarket had captured footage of Carmen, providing a potential lead in the search. During their investigation of the rented house where Carmen and Jack lived, police noticed that there was no outdoor garbage can. Inside the house, they found bloodstains on the front door, washing machine, sink, and shower. To confirm the presence of blood, forensic scientists used luminol, a substance that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of blood on the bathroom door and floor. The landlord reported that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. When she knocked on Carmen's door, no one answered. She looked out the window and saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack, which caught her attention. She called her husband, but before he arrived, Brad walked out of the house, carrying soiled clothes. He told the landlord that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlord noticed that Brad appeared to have just taken a shower. She had no reason to doubt his story, so she didn't call the police. The search for Carmen continued, and her cell phone activity caught the police's attention. Although messages were being sent from her phone regularly, the tone and language used were unusual and didn't match her previous communication style. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found, and in the back seat, they discovered her luggage, clothes, and other personal belongings. The police investigation into Carmen's disappearance began with the examination of her seized suitcase, which revealed traces of blood and a note indicating she owed money to her employer. An envelope with Misty's name and $270 was also found in the glove compartment. Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after finding blood in the car and launched a search for Carmen's body in the countryside southeast of Auckland, but it was inconclusive. As the investigation continued, police analyzed Carmen's and Brad's phones, discovering they had been in close proximity to each other during the search. However, Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had disappeared from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen vanished. A neighbor reported seeing the can being taken away through her window. Police suspected the trash can might have been used to dispose of evidence. When EE examined Brad's phone records and bank card details, then they found that on June 30th, Brad had purchased a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and several garbage bags, which raised suspicions. By studying Brad's daily routine, police identified some unusual events, including a day when he arrived early at the construction site and walked alone around the property for an extended period. While it was not unusual for a supervisor to be on site early, the police found it noteworthy. After gathering evidence, including Carmen's cell phone and suspicious purchases, they began to suspect Brad of murder. They believed Brad had killed his former lover, Carmen Thomas, by hitting her multiple times in the head and then carefully hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to obstruct justice. Brad's second son was born while he was in custody, causing him to become emotional and resentful. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators the location of Carmen's body. It turned out that Brad had attempted to create an alibi by making it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never returned. However, under questioning, he eventually detailed the events of the day Carmen was killed, revealing that his plan had not been as perfect as he thought. Brad admitted that Carmen and Brad had a heated argument, which ended with Carmen telling Brad that Jack was not his son. In a fit of rage, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house. However, he returned 5 minutes later, grabbed a baseball bat, and brutally attacked Carmen, striking her in the head with such force that she fell unconscious, bleeding profusely. Despite realizing the gravity of his actions, Brad continued to assault Carmen, throwing several punches. Memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but his anger and resentment consumed him. Brad knew his life would never be the same after this moment, and he could never undo the damage. Nevertheless, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, believing that he had solved his problem and ensured that Jack was now his alone. Brad regained his composure, took a shower, and quietly left Carmen's house. In the following days, he devised a plan to dispose of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. He met his friend outside a supermarket and asked him to buy black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning products, hoping to avoid raising suspicion. Brad then returned to the apartment, meticulously cleaned up the bloodstains, wrapped Carmen's body in a bag, and disposed of it in a trash can. After killing Carmen, Brad dismembered her body into 8 pieces to make it easier to dispose of. He cut off her legs at the hip joints and then cut each leg in half at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. A few days later, on July 3rd, Brad met a friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He confessed to his friend that he had killed Carmen during an argument and asked for help disposing of her body. However, his friend refused to provide a boat to dump the remains into the sea. Over the next few days, Brad drove to Ware Ridge in West Auckland and buried the dismembered body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He left a suitcase of clothes and some of her personal belongings in the car to make it seem like she had left voluntarily. However, he made a critical mistake by including bloody clothes in the suitcase. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Brad started sending text messages from Carmen's cell phone to her friends, pretending to be her. He claimed that she was not feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. However, this plan ultimately backfired on him. On October 1st, police excavated the burial site indicated by Brad and found the body of Carmen Thomas. Her remains were discovered in plastic containers, carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Wayfair Ridge. An autopsy revealed that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family on October 13th. Tragically, her young son Jack, who had been waiting and hoping to see his mother again, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, Brad Callahan's first court hearing was held. Judge Winning determined that the crime was unintentional and took into account Brad's claim that he acted impulsively in a state of rage. However, the judge was more severe in his assessment of the subsequent cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A retrial was held on November 25, 2011, where police officers filled the High Court in Auckland. In a surprise move, Brad Callahan made 2 guilty pleas, admitting to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. A judge has sentenced 31-year-old Brad Callahan to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas. Brad was also given a 6-year sentence for attempting to interfere with the investigation into Thomas's death. The judge considered this one of the most serious cases of attempted interference with justice, describing Brad's actions as extremely serious. During the trial at Auckland High Court, the judge criticized the brutality of Thomas's murder, but decided not to impose the harshest possible sentence. The courtroom was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venin condemned Brad's attempts to cover up his crime, which involved considerable effort and deception. The 6-year sentence for interfering with the investigation will be served at the same time as the life sentence. In a statement, the Thomas family expressed their ongoing anger and grief, saying that no punishment can bring their daughter back. However, they are relieved that Brad will be in prison for a long time, giving him the opportunity to reflect on the harm he has caused. Little boy Jack Brad is living with his grandmother in another town under an assumed name. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Natalie Holloway. Natalie Holloway was born on October 21, 1986, in Clinton, Mississippi, to Elizabeth and David Edward Holloway. Her parents had a loving relationship that began in their youth, but after 13 years of marriage, they divorced due to the stresses of domestic life. Following the divorce, Natalie and her brother Matthew lived with their mother, who continued to receive emotional and financial support from their father. In 2000, Elizabeth remarried to George Twitty, a businessman from Alabama, and the family moved to Mountain Brook. The transition was seamless, and Natalie and her brother remained close to their father, visiting him regularly during holidays. Natalie's upbringing was deeply influenced by her family's strong Christian values, which emphasized kindness, modesty, and community involvement. As a result, she developed into a compassionate and humble individual who prioritized her studies and extracurricular activities over social events. Despite her popularity, Natalie chose not to attend parties or go on dates, instead focusing on her goals and aspirations. She was an excellent student, a skilled dancer, and an active member of various clubs, with ambitions to pursue a career in medicine and secure a scholarship to a local university. On May 26, 2005, Natalie joined 123 other students and 7 chaperones on a trip to a beautiful Aruba island. The group of 18-year-olds stayed at the Holiday Inn and spent their time relaxing on the beach, swimming, and enjoying the local restaurants and entertainment. They made the most of their trip, dancing into the early hours of the morning. On the night of May 29th to 30th, Natalie was initially acting normally and socializing while sober. However, after consuming a drink given to her by Joran, her behavior changed, indicating that she may have been under the influence of a substance. The staff at Carlos and Charlie's bar had a positive opinion of Natalie, but viewed Joran unfavorably due to his history of poor behavior, gambling, and substance abuse. Joran had a reputation for renting hotel rooms with friends, where they would invite foreign women and secretly record their activities, later uploading the videos online. Natalie Holloway's disappearance began with a frantic phone call from her mother, Elizabeth Twitty. After failing to reach her daughter, Elizabeth contacted one of the trip's chaperones to report her concerns. Elizabeth's instincts told her something was wrong, as Natalie was a responsible and punctual person who always stayed in touch. When Natalie didn't return to the airport with the rest of the group on May 30th, Elizabeth's worst fears were confirmed. Her belongings, including her phone and passport, were still at the hotel, but Natalie was nowhere to be found. Elizabeth and her husband quickly flew to Aruba to search for their missing daughter. When Elizabeth arrived in Aruba, she discovered more about Natalie's disappearance than the police had. Unfortunately, the authorities didn't seem to be in a hurry to investigate and initially disregarded Elizabeth's concerns. This type of case isn't unusual in Aruba, and the police appeared to be taking it lightly. They implied that it was common for tourists to miss their flights or lose track of their group, and that Natalie was probably just having fun, drinking, or socializing with new people. Natalie's last known whereabouts were on May 30th at around 1:30 a.m., when she left a bar with a man named Van der Sloot. They got into a car with 2 other young men, and that's the last time she was seen. Natalie and her friends had been spending time at the notorious Carlos and Charlie's nightclub and casino. On one of those nights, she met a 17-year-old local named Joran, who offered to buy her a drink. He then invited her to visit a lighthouse and see sharks in the area. As they left the club, a silver Honda car driven by the Deepak Kalpoe brothers was waiting for them. Elizabeth contacted the police for a second time 4 hours later, and this time she shared some concerning information. As a result, the 3 individuals were detained. Van der Sloot initially claimed he didn't know Natalie, but eventually admitted he had left the bar with her. According to him, they spent some time driving around, stopped by the beach, and later dropped Natalie off near her hotel. Deepak Kalpoe brothers, 18, and the 21-year-old, confirmed Van der Sloot's story. It's worth noting that the 3 were questioned together by the police, an approach that seems questionable from a law enforcement perspective. Later on, they altered their statements multiple times. Despite his questionable behavior, Joran was never held accountable for his actions. none of the charges against him went to court. It was later discovered that Joran's father, Paulus van der Sloot, was a well-known lawyer who was seeking a judgeship. Apparently, corruption was prevalent in Aruba, allowing individuals like Joran to avoid accountability for their actions. As the investigation continued, David Holloway, Natalie's father, arrived in Aruba and joined the search efforts, which were led by his ex-wife and journalists. As public pressure mounted, it was discovered that the hotel's surveillance cameras did not capture the suspect's car, and there was no footage of Natalie entering the building on May 30th. This revelation contradicted the statements of Joran and the Kalpoe brothers, who were subsequently called in for questioning again. During this second round of questioning, one of the Kalpoe brothers unexpectedly changed his story, claiming that he had dropped Natalie off at a location before reaching the hotel, which was not covered by surveillance cameras. He also added that he had seen a figure in black approaching Natalie, who was later revealed to be one of the hotel's security guards. On June 5th, investigators took into custody the hotel security staff who were working the night Natalie disappeared. 4 days later, on June 9th, detectives arrested 3 people, including 2 of the Kalpoe brothers, due to suspicious circumstances. While in jail, one of the security guards learned something important from the Kalpoe brothers. Satish admitted that he and his brother Deepak had lied to protect their friend Joran. In reality, they had left Joran alone with Natalie on the beach and had gone their separate ways. The security guards were released on June 13th. A few days later, on June 17th, police detained Steve Gregory Cruz, a DJ who had worked on yacht parties, because they suspected he might be involved in Natalie's disappearance. On June 22nd, Paulus van der Sloot, Joran's father, was questioned and detained by police, but he was released on June 26th along with Steve Cruz because there was not enough evidence. Joran later changed his story again, this time blaming the Kalpoe brothers for Natalie's disappearance. He claimed that he had said goodbye to Natalie near his home and that she had left with the brothers. However, his new story was not believable. The Kalpoe brothers' lawyer responded to Joran's accusations. After a short trial on July 4th, the Kalpoe brothers were released from custody. At the same time, Joran's time in custody was extended by 2 more months. Despite the growing evidence, the police seemed to be ignoring Joran's possible involvement in Natalie's disappearance. Joran van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987, in Arnhem, Netherlands, to Paulus van der Sloot, a lawyer, and Anita van der Sloot-Hugen, an art teacher. He was one of 3 brothers in a large family that moved to Aruba in 1990. Joran grew up on the island, where he attended the International School of Aruba and excelled academically. He also developed a passion for sports, particularly soccer and tennis, and showed promise in these areas. Joran's family life was complicated. As a child, he was closer to his father, but his relationship with his mother was strained. Anita considered Joran dishonest and struggled to instill good values in him. She remembered him as a rebellious child who frequently ran away from home. As Joran entered adulthood, he began to associate with a questionable crowd and developed a taste for gambling. Despite this, he presented himself as confident and fearless to his friends, which initially impressed many people. However, locals were wary of Joran, sensing that his permissive behavior would eventually lead to trouble. Joran was popular with girls, but he often took advantage of them. Overall, people had mixed opinions about Joran, with some being drawn to his charismatic personality and others being put off by his questionable behavior. As the investigation into the suspects continued, the search for Natalie Holloway remained ongoing. U.S. authorities assisted by closely monitoring the progress and providing significant financial support to aid in the search for the Natalie. Although the Aruban authorities were not pleased with the increased scrutiny, they accepted the funding. On August 26, the police detained the Kalpoe brothers and another young man, but this was unrelated to the case. The arrest was an attempt to intimidate them into talking. All four were released on bail on September 3, 2005, and a week and a half later, all restrictions were lifted. Joran van der Sloot spent about 3 months in custody. After his release, he reveled in the notoriety, giving interviews and appearing on TV shows. He claimed Natalee Holloway was flirtatious and offered intimacy, but he declined due to lack of contraception. When questioned about his credibility, Joran threw a glass at the interviewer, showcasing his impulsiveness and aggression. According to the recorder, Joran van der Sloot was confessing to witnessing Natalee Holloway's death on the beach in Aruba. He claimed they were intimate before she lost consciousness, and despite trying CPR, she died. Van der Sloot said he and a friend disposed of her body at sea. Despite the damning recording, Van der Sloot again avoided consequences, quickly denying his statement after it aired. In his 2007 book, The Case of Natalee Holloway, My Own Account, Van der Sloot maintained his innocence, apologizing to Natalee's family and providing his account of events, despite ceasing search efforts by authorities. In 2008, 2 new witnesses came forward in the case. One reported seeing Joran and his father on the beach near the Holiday Inn on May 30, 2005, around 4 a.m. Joran appeared disheveled and shirtless. The witness saw them arguing in a car before driving away. However, Paulus had an alibi for the night of Natalee's disappearance. Joran's former girlfriend also came forward, recalling a comment he made about easily disposing of a body. However, Joran was known for lying and exaggerating. Despite these developments, Joran and the Kalpoe brothers were detained and released multiple times. The Holloway family hired a private investigator, Tim Miller, who searched the landfill and discovered oversights by the island's police, including failure to interview Natalee's classmates or hotel room neighbors. Natalee's electronic room key was used several times on the night of her disappearance, and she left behind her rare and expensive mobile phone. A male DNA was found on her toothbrush. The investigation's flaws were exposed. After his father's death, Joran contacted the Holloway family, offering to reveal the truth about Natalee's disappearance for a $250,000 reward. He claimed he wanted to clear his conscience, but was actually blackmailing them. The Holloways, desperate for answers, paid Joran $25,000 to meet with their lawyer, John Kelly, in Aruba. Joran provided a new account of events, claiming Natalee resisted his sexual assault, struggled, and hit her head on a rock after he pushed her. He then buried her body in a building foundation. Elizabeth Twitty followed up on Joran's claims by contacting the police. However, verifying his story was simple, and it quickly became apparent that the house he pointed to had been built long before Natalee's disappearance. As a result, the police concluded that his testimony was insufficient to warrant an arrest. It was widely believed that Joran had fabricated another lie to obtain money, and after receiving the funds, he fled to Peru. In another case, on June 1, 2010, the body of 21-year-old Stephanie Tatiana Flores Ramirez was found in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. She had suffered severe injuries and died from a neck fracture. The case drew significant media attention due to the victim's father being a well-known businessman and former Formula One driver. Surveillance footage quickly identified the perpetrator. Surprisingly, the perpetrator was Joran van der Sloot. He was arrested and taken into custody. He claimed to have met Stephanie at the Atlantic City Casino on May 30th, where they played poker together. They then decided to continue their time in his hotel room, where they gambled at an online casino. Stephanie discovered disturbing information on Joran's laptop while he was in the bathroom. She learned that he was a suspect in the disappearance of Natalee Holloway, which frightened her and made her want to leave. However, Joran caught her and became enraged when he realized what she had found. He physically attacked her until he was certain she was dead. After the attack, Joran showered and left the scene, instructing the staff not to disturb Stephanie, falsely claiming she was sleeping. Her body was found 3 days later, on June 3rd. Joran was caught on June 4th while trying to flee to Chile and subsequently confessed to the crime. The news of the murder shocked the U.S., especially given that it occurred exactly 5 years after Natalee Holloway's disappearance. Elizabeth Twitty, Natalie's mother, was moved by the news, saying that justice had finally been served, but at a terrible cost. On January 11, 2012, Joran van der Sloot was sentenced to 28 years in prison for Stephanie's murder and ordered to pay the Ramirez family $75,000 in compensation. Joran was first imprisoned at Pedras Gordas, but was later moved to Chalip Pala in 2014. During his incarceration, he married a Peruvian woman he met in 2010 while she was visiting another inmate. She believed that Joran had genuinely changed and become a better person, describing him as attentive and gentle during their time together. However, this proved to be a facade, as Joran was actually using her for his own benefit and showed no remorse for his past actions. Meanwhile, Natalee Holloway's family was seeking closure. In June 2011, her father, David Holloway, filed a petition in an Alabama court to have Natalee declared legally deceased. Natalee's mother opposed this move, holding on to the hope that Joran would eventually confess to the crime and face trial. After 2 hearings, Judge Alan King ruled in favor of the declaration, stating that all necessary requirements had been met. On January 12, 2012, the court officially declared Natalee deceased. On June 8, 2023, van der Sloot was extradited to the United States and taken to the Hoover City Jail in Alabama. The next day, he was charged with extortion and wire fraud, but he denied all charges. However, on October 18, 2023, he changed his plea and admitted to murdering Natalee Holloway. He confessed to killing her on May 30, 2005, by hitting her with a cinder block after she rejected his advances, and then disposing of her body in the ocean where it was likely consumed by sharks. Although van der Sloot confessed to the crime as part of a plea deal, this confession cannot be used as evidence in court. As a result, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which will be served at the same time as his existing prison term in Peru. Despite the confession, Natalee Holloway's disappearance remains an open case in Aruba, and her murder has gone unpunished due to a series of cover-ups, corrupt deals, and bureaucratic delays, despite widespread international attention to the investigation.